shadow daddy trope has gained a lot of mainstream appeal through the vehicle of mass promotion that is book talk. That being said, it is not by any means a new trope. Before the shadow daddy moniker was gaining ground in popular discourse, you could find many iterations of this character present in genres like fantasy romance and paranormal romance. Oftentimes, this was a male character who was centuries old, immensely powerful, devastatingly attractive, and held supernatural powers that represented a literal or metaphorical manifestation of his internal darkness. While the shadow daddy is typically coined for a character that does in fact wield shadow magic, I do believe that this term can be broadened to include male love interests who are otherwise tied to some dark infernal force that can then be used to contrast with the light and purity of the female heroine tasked with saving his soul. Popular examples of this trope include Kylo Ren from Star Wars, the Darkling from Netflix's Shadow and Bone, and Halbrand/Sauron from The Rings of Power. You can probably find roots of this character going back all the way to the Romantics in the 19th century, in particular Lord Byron and his much beloved tortured, brooding and dark Byronic heroes. Though Byron's own works were generally grounded in the setting and societal mores of the times in which he was writing, the shadow daddy trope is one that uniquely appears in genre fiction, in particular romantic subgenres of fantasy. It's not difficult to see why this happens. The fantasy genre has often been used as a means of exploring allegory and elevating the mundanity of regular life by introducing elements of magic and the supernatural. Ancient supernatural love interests, such as the vampire, have always been heavily featured in women's fiction and used to symbolize their repressed desires for intimacy and the danger it can inflict on them physically and reputationally. However, like with most fictional staples, this has gradually seen a shift with the times, evolving with changing social mores surrounding sex, gender roles, and the expectations of women after decades of feminism. While I do believe the shadow daddy represents certain repressed desires heterosexual women still have to this day for intimacy with men, I feel there's a troubling narrative that tends to follow with how this trope is portrayed and interacted with in fiction. One thing I wanted to touch on was how the romances themselves tend to take shape between the shadow daddy and the female heroine. From the jump, this dynamic tends to be wildly imbalanced in the male character's favour, with him largely being a lot older, more powerful, and physically stronger than her, even more pronounced than how such dynamics unfold between men and women in real life. The shadow daddy tends to be the conduit through which the female lead first encounters the supernatural, and he will simultaneously take on a mentorship role to her, alongside eventually becoming her lover. As you can imagine, this can lead to a romance rife with problematic implications, but the purpose of this video is not to moralise on this dynamic, technically. It's more to examine what I feel the pervasiveness of it is attempting to convey to the audience about what we as a society have been taught to value in each other. Age, experience, wealth and power are status markers in society to be pursued by men, whereas youth, beauty, innocence and fertility are traits to be pursued by women. This form of gender essentialism can become quite pronounced in fantasy fiction in a way that can start to raise eyebrows, at least in my personal experience. It can't be denied, the fantasy the shadow daddy presents is the ideal of a man who is the peak representation of masculinity, the one who can do it all, as it were, and presents a lot of exhausted, beaten down women, the allure of an escape from a world surrounded by various threats of male violence and an exploitative financial system. Many women, instead of banding together to change the system, compromise by seeking out a male protector in hopes that by relying on his emotional fondness for her, she can be preserved from this. After all, changing society is an arduous task and rarely ever guaranteed. Better to find yourself a rich, powerful husband and align yourself with him enough to hopefully wield power through him, right? Well, the problem for me is that this narrative likes to flirt with the risks involved without ever fully committing. Because alongside being aged and powerful, the shadow daddy is often morally ambiguous, sometimes to the point of being outright villainous, but because it is a romance, the male lead can't ever be anything but justifiable and able to be rooted for. So we tend to get these twisted might makes right narratives, where the only reason the shadow daddy is considered righteous is because he cannot ever truly be challenged, and that can lead to him being indiscriminately cruel and overbearing to everyone around him with impunity, including towards the female lead over the course of their relationship. It's protectiveness that tips right over into condescending paternalism. The shadow daddy knows what's best because how can he not? He's been around the block a few hundred times, and the heroine is barely more than a girl. So long as she complies, he'll take care of everything, destroy every threat, fulfill every desire. All she has to do is give up her autonomy. Instead of this being cause for her to leave, she must always remain staunchly loyal, willing to forgive him and redeem him with the purity of her love. Such is her duty as a woman, of course. A lot of female fantasies put stock in emotional power, and I get why. The vast majority of women do not have the capacity to physically defend ourselves in a confrontation with a man, and hoping he'll like you enough not to hurt you can be a temporary comfort from that. However, it's not satisfying enough to me because the story doesn't want to grapple too much with the limitations of emotional power, how much danger the female lead is in when the hyper-competent, aged and powerful villain decides he doesn't like you very much, or even what happens if he likes you too much. Stalking, dubious consent, SA, emotional manipulation and physical harm can be common themes found within a shadow daddy romance, and even still, the female lead must remain compliant, her strength measured in how much she is willing to endure to attain her happily ever after. I've always found it somewhat defeatist to see this upheld as an empowering narrative for many female leads. Far be it from me to judge if you just happen to find it titillating or erotic, but for something that is meant to celebrate the strength, endurance and fortitude of women, I feel as if we could aim for something much higher. To imagine a world could exist where the power of men is not so insurmountable, the only thing we can do is submit to it. I want to leave you off with this passage from Loving to Survive by D. Graham. It says, "This quotation we placed at the beginning of this chapter asks where women can find a perspective outside our battering culture that will allow us to critique and therefore start to transform that culture. One answer is that through our imaginations, we can create that other world. Such creation is not fabrication but invention, ever near, to come upon, which is to discover, to uncover, to remember, to recollect. The new perspective women need is a rediscovery of a perspective we may have possessed but have forgotten. As Wittig reminds us, there was a time when you were not a slave. Remember that. You walked alone, full of laughter. You bathed bare-bellied. You say you have lost all recollection of it. Remember. You say there are no words to describe this time. You say it does not exist. But remember. Make an effort to remember. Or failing that, invent." Thank you for reaching the end of this video. If you'd like to hear more insights from me on media, pop culture, and my journey as an independent author, then please remember to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any updates from me. Until next time.